I put the kettle on the stove and leaned against the kitchen windowsill, watching the neighbor's cat stroll leisurely along the fence. The evening Houston sun was painting the yard a soft golden color, and I smiled involuntarily at this picture of peace. There was a familiar silence in the house, the same silence I'd experienced every day for the past 3 years since Martha had passed away. The whistle of the kettle interrupted my musings. I brewed myself a strong black tea, added a spoonful of honey, and settled into my favorite chair by the television. 72 was an age when many of my peers were already struggling to get around the house, and I was still feeling quite alert. My morning walks, my work in the small garden behind the house, my weekly trips to the grocery store, all of it was effortless. A familiar voice sounded outside the window. Dorothy, my neighbor, was watering her roses with the garden hose and humming something to herself. I opened the window. "Good evening, Dorothy. How are your beauties doing?" The old woman looked up and waved her gardening gloved hand at me. "Oh, hello, Roger. Just trying to save them from this heat. It hasn't rained in a week. How are you guys doing?" "I'm fine, thanks. Today I finally fixed that squeak in the bedroom door that's been bugging me for a month." Dorothy laughed. "Martha would be proud of you. She always said you had golden hands." The mention of my wife caused a familiar pinch in my chest, but I only nodded. Dorothy was easy to talk to. She understood what it was like to be alone after so many years together. Her husband had died 5 years ago, and we sometimes shared memories with each other without fear of sounding sentimental. "And your son doesn't drop by?" "I haven't seen him in a while." "Connor's busy with his own business," I answered, and there was a dryness in my voice that was barely perceptible. "His notary's office is thriving." Dorothy must have sensed some tension in my tone, because she nodded and went back to her roses. I closed the window and finished my tea, thinking about how my relationship with my only son had changed. Connor used to come every weekend when Martha was alive. Bringing his wife Wyvern, they'd have dinner as a family, discussing news, plans for the future. Connor talked about his work, about the clients of his notary office, about how his business was growing. Wyvern helped Martha in the kitchen, and the women chatted about all sorts of nonsense, laughing at some women's jokes. In those days, the house was full of life, of conversation, the smells of home-cooked food and children's laughter. Sometimes they brought their friends' children with them. Martha loved these family evenings. She would prepare for them in advance, buying special foods, setting the table with the best dishes, pulling out the crystal we had received as a wedding gift from the cupboard. After dinner, the men usually went to the living room to watch soccer or the news, and the women stayed in the kitchen, washing dishes and continuing their endless conversations. Things changed after the funeral. At first, the visits became less frequent, once every 2 weeks, then once a month. Connor attributed it to his workload, the need to expand his client base. Wyvern nodded, confirming her husband's words, but I noticed her gaze sliding around the house, lingering on the antiques Martha had collected, the paintings, the antique clocks in the living room. She was especially interested in the collection of porcelain figurines Martha had collected over the years. Wyvern would pick them up, examine them, ask about their origins. Sometimes she wondered if I had any plans to sell them, because a house this big took a lot of work to keep in order. "Maybe you should get rid of some of your stuff," she'd say with ostentatious concern. "Why do you need so many dishes, so much furniture? You could live a simpler life." I replied that I wasn't ready to part with Martha's things yet. They were the memory of her, of our life together. But Wyvern only sighed, as if I were a stubborn old man who didn't understand the obvious. The last time my son visited was about 2 months ago. He looked tense, kept glancing at his watch, and Wyvern was silent most of the time, only occasionally inserting sentences about the weather or how good the pie I'd baked was. It was then that Connor first brought up the fact that I'd be better off moving into a nursing home. "Dad, you realize we're worried about you," he said, sitting on the edge of the couch, as if he were going to jump up and run away at any moment. "This house is too big for one person. What if something happens? Who's going to help you?" "There's nothing wrong with me," I answered then. "I'm fine with household chores, and the neighbors are nearby, if anything." "But that's not the answer," Wyvern intervened. "You can't rely on the neighbors. They have their own lives, their own problems." Wyvern bit her lip and looked at her husband with a meaningful look. I remembered that look well, the impatience in it, the desire to end an unpleasant conversation as soon as possible. But think about the practical side of it, Connor continued. The upkeep of the house, the utilities, the repairs. It's expensive, and in a nursing home, you wouldn't have to worry about anything. Plus, Wyvern added, there's medical staff, organized meals, recreational activities. You'll be able to find friends your own age. Then I cut the conversation short rather abruptly, saying that I was still capable of making my own decisions about my life. Connor and Wyvern left earlier than usual that day and never called again. Not until today. I got up from my chair and walked around the living room, adjusting the pictures on the mantel. Here's me and Martha on our wedding day, young, happy, full of hope. Here's little Connor taking his first steps across this same living room. Here's a family photo taken about 10 years ago, when everyone was still together and smiling genuinely into the lens. Something had changed in my son, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Maybe it was the money. Connor's notary business was doing well, as far as I knew, but lately his son often complained about the growing competition, the difficulty in getting lucrative orders. Wyvern worked as a manager for some firm, but I suspected her salary wasn't very high. On their last visit, I noticed that they'd arrived in a new car, an expensive SUV that had obviously cost a lot. Connor attributed the purchase to the need to make a good impression on his clients, but I remembered how he'd driven used cars when he was younger and had been quite happy with them. What made him spend that kind of money now? Or maybe it was the inheritance. I never talked openly with my son about my savings, but anyone with a head understood that a house in a good neighborhood in Houston cost a lot of money. In addition, Martha left behind her jewelry, rings, necklaces, bracelets, which we bought her for anniversaries and birthdays. And I myself had a decent bank account, the result of many years of work as an engineer and reasonable savings. Martha always said that one should save money for a rainy day. We'd never lived off the grid, preferring stability to ostentatious luxury. The engineer's salary allowed us to live comfortably, but not excessively. We'd saved for Connor's education, for his wedding, for our own old age. Now those savings were in the bank, waiting to be tapped. I wondered if Connor knew about it. We'd never discussed my finances in detail, but he must have guessed that after so many years of working and saving, I must have savings. Especially since the house was fully paid off a decade ago. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I glanced at the caller ID and saw the familiar numbers. Hello, Connor. Hey, Dad, what's up? How are you feeling? There was an unnatural cheerfulness in my son's voice, like he was forcing himself to sound cheerful. I'm fine. How are you? Is Wyvern well? Yeah, she's fine. She works hard. She's tired. But all in all, she's fine. Pause. I could hear Connor breathing into the phone, like he was getting his act together. Look, Dad, I need to talk to you. Not over the phone. Can we meet tomorrow? Say at that cafe on Westheimer where you like to go? I frowned. Connor sounded agitated, and it was unsettling. Had something happened? No, nothing serious. It's just that there's a matter that would be better discussed in person, and Wyvern wants to come too. Tomorrow at 3 would be okay with you? Sure, I'll be there. That's great. I'll see you tomorrow, Dad. Thank you. Thanks for what? For agreeing to meet. It's important to us. Connor hung up without waiting for an answer. I stared at the phone for a while, trying to figure out what could have called for such an urgent meeting. My son hadn't called in 2 months, and now he suddenly wanted to see me in a public place, not at home. And why Wyvern? She usually only came with her husband for family dinners. I returned to my chair and turned on the TV, but my thoughts were far away from what was happening on the screen. I'd noticed more and more lately that people were treating me differently, with the kind of caution they showed toward the elderly. The clerk at the store spoke to me slowly and loudly, as if I was hard of hearing. The neighbor to my left asked me every time if I needed help with my bags. Even the doctor at my last checkup spoke to me in a patronizing tone, explaining obvious things. Maybe Connor didn't see me as a father anymore, but as a burden, an old man who needed to be put somewhere safe before he did something stupid? Or was it something else, money, an inheritance, a desire to speed things up? Outside the window it had gone completely dark. Street lamps illuminated the empty street, where cars of belated neighbors passed occasionally. Dorothy's house was also dark. She had gone to bed early. I turned off the TV, checked the locks on the doors, and went up to the bedroom. Tomorrow I would find out what was bothering my son so much, and why the meeting was scheduled at a cafe and not at home, where we could talk calmly and frankly. Something told me that tomorrow's conversation would change a lot of things in our relationship, but I had no idea in which direction. The morning greeted me with a clear sky and birds singing outside my window. I woke up at 7:30 as usual, without an alarm clock. My body had long since gotten used to this mode. I showered, shaved, put on a clean shirt and jeans. In the mirror, I was looking at a quite vigorous man of 72, with gray but still thick hair and clear eyes. Martha always said I looked good for my age, and I tried to maintain that standard. After eating a breakfast of oatmeal with fruit and drinking coffee, I made a shopping list. The refrigerator was running low on milk and bread, and I wanted to buy fresh fish for dinner and replenish my canned goods. It had been a long time since I'd bought myself something tasty. Maybe I could find some good cheese or those chocolate chip cookies Martha likes so much. The supermarket was a 15-minute walk from the house. I could have driven, but I preferred to walk, to get some air and stretch my legs. Now I use the car only for long journeys or in bad weather. On the way I met my neighbor Frank, who was walking his golden retriever named Charlie. The dog wagged his tail happily when he saw me and reached for the customary scratching behind the ear. "Good morning, Roger. How'd you sleep?" "Fine, thank you. And Charlie's in fine form, I see." "Yes, that rascal makes me get up at 6 o'clock every day," laughed Frank. "But the doctor says it's good for me to walk. Movement is life these days." Frank was my age, but unlike me, he had been registered with a cardiologist for several years. Regular walks with his dog really helped him to maintain his health. "How are things going with the grandchildren?" I asked. "Oh, they are growing by leaps and bounds. The eldest has already entered university, studying computer science. Can you imagine he wants to become a programmer? And the youngest is following in her mother's footsteps. She's going to medical school." Frank's voice was full of pride. His children lived in a neighboring state, but they regularly came with their families, especially for holidays. I sometimes envied those family gatherings at Frank's house. "How's your Connor? Haven't seen him around the neighborhood in a while." "Busy with work," I said. "We're going out tonight to talk business." It's good that kids don't forget their parents. Although I know that young people have their own worries now, they don't have time for anything. We said goodbye and I continued on my way to the store. Thinking about Frank's grandchildren got me thinking about my own family. Connor and Wyvern had no children, though they had been married for 8 years. Martha had often hinted to her son that she'd like to have grandchildren, but Connor had always replied that he and his wife weren't ready for that responsibility yet. "Career comes first," he explained. "They need to get on their feet first, to provide a stable future for their children." Wyvern agreed, adding something about how expensive it was to raise children these days. Martha was upset but didn't insist, hoping that time would change their plans. Now I realized that I was probably not going to have grandchildren. The supermarket wasn't crowded. It was morning, when most people were still at work or at home. I took the cart and walked leisurely through the departments, choosing products. In the fish department, the clerk, an elderly African-American woman named Gloria, waved me over. "Mr. Clark, how are you? I haven't seen you in a while." "Hello, Gloria. I'm just running low on supplies. What can you recommend for fresh fish?" "We got some great salmon today, straight from Alaska, and the halibut is very good. Why don't you try the sea bass? It's tender, cooks up great in the oven." I chose a piece of salmon. Martha loved it, and I'd kept the habit of buying red fish. Gloria carefully wrapped the purchase in a special paper. "Say hello to Mrs. Clark," she said automatically, and then she blushed. "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot." "I'm so sorry." "It's okay, Gloria. It happens." I realized that people forget sometimes. Martha did go shopping with me often, and Gloria was used to seeing us together. My wife's death was still fresh in the minds of acquaintances, and they didn't always know how to behave. In the dairy department, I met another acquaintance, Elizabeth Harris, the wife of a local dentist. We had known each other for many years, occasionally meeting at neighborhood events. "Roger, what a pleasure to meet you." Elizabeth looked as impeccable as ever. Neat hair, light makeup, expensive clothes. How are you? How's your health? I'm fine, thank you. How's your family? No complaints, thank you. My daughter just got her PhD. She's a doctor now. James and I are very proud. Elizabeth always loved to talk about her children's accomplishments. They had two, a son who was a lawyer and a daughter who was a scientist, both successful and wealthy. How's your Connor? I hear he has a thriving notary office. Yeah, he works hard. We're meeting today to discuss business. It's great that the kids are taking care of their parents. You know, nowadays it's not always like that. A lot of young people forget about family values. Elizabeth said this with a certain superiority in her voice, as if her own children were a model of filial devotion. As far as I knew, though, they lived pretty far away and didn't visit their parents any more often than Connor visited me. By the way, she went on, if you need any help around the house or anything, feel free to ask. We're neighbors, so we have to support each other. Thank you, that's very kind of you. I realized it was just a simple courtesy, but it was still nice to hear such words. When you're old, you appreciate the warmth of a person, even if it's in the form of a casual phrase. Having finished shopping, I headed for the cash register. In front stood a young mother with two small children. The kids were cranky, one demanding candy, the other dropping a toy and crying. The woman looked tired and irritated. Quiet, Jacob. Madison, stop it, she hissed, trying to calm the children. I watched the scene with some nostalgia. I used to stand in lines like this with little Connor, who could get cranky at the worst possible moment. Martha would usually take him in her arms and distract him with some game while I paid for my purchases. Now that little boy is a grown man with his own problems and plans. Time flies fast and we don't always notice how the people around us change. I wonder how Connor sees me now. An old man who's interfering with his life? A source of future inheritance? Or just a father who needs to be visited as a matter of duty? It took a little longer to get home. The grocery bags were a little heavy. I stopped for a break at a bench in a small park that had been laid out between residential neighborhoods. It was quiet and cozy, with old oaks providing cool shade. On a nearby bench sat an elderly man with a newspaper. He looked up when I sat down next to him. It's a hot day, he said. Yes, but the breeze is nice. I sit here every morning reading the newspaper. At home, my wife turns on the TV, and there's so much noise. But here it's quiet. The man looked about 80 years old, but quite cheerful. His wedding ring glistened on his finger, so his wife was still alive. How long have you lived in the neighborhood? I asked. 30 years. And you? Almost 40. We bought the house when my son was young. The children grew up and scattered, the stranger said philosophically. That's life. My son lives in California, calls once a week. My grandchildren are there too. We rarely see each other. These words made me sad. How many lonely old people like that live in our city? People who raised their children, worked all their lives, and now spend their days alone, occasionally receiving phone calls from their busy descendants. How is your son doing? The man asked. Lives right here in Houston. Notary Public. We're meeting today. It's good to be close. It's easier to communicate. I nodded even though I realized that physical proximity didn't always mean emotional proximity. Connor lived an hour away from me, but he called less often than this stranger's son from California. After resting for a while, I made my way home and laid out my shopping. The salmon went into the refrigerator, the canned goods into the pantry, the bread into the bread box. All of these familiar activities were calming, creating a sense of order and stability. After lunch, I went out to the garden. The tomatoes needed watering, and there were weeds in the rose bed. Martha loved to tinker with flowers, and I continued to tend to her roses, even though I didn't know as much about gardening as she did. Working in the garden always helped me think. Today, my thoughts revolved around the upcoming meeting with Connor and Wyvern. What could be so important that it required a face-to-face conversation? And why in a cafe and not at home? Maybe they wanted to communicate about the divorce or financial problems. Or maybe Wyvern was finally pregnant and they decided to share the happy news. Though for such news, they usually chose a more solemn setting rather than a public place. The sun was slipping toward dusk when I finished my work in the garden. My hands were in the soil and there were grass stains on my shirt, but I felt a pleasant fatigue from the physical labor. In my youth, I had worked with my hands as much as with my head. The engineering profession often required not only theoretical knowledge, but also practical skills. I took a shower, changed into clean clothes, and cooked dinner. The salmon was excellent, tender, juicy, with lemon and spices. I ate slowly, enjoying the flavor and the silence of the house. After dinner, I watched the news, read a book, and went to bed early. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I will find out what my son was so worried about. For now, the day passed quietly and normally, like hundreds of other days over the past 3 years. Nothing foretold that tomorrow's meeting would change my measured life. I woke up at the usual time, but my sleep was restless. All night I dreamed strange dreams, like Martha calling me from the garden, or Connor asking me to help with his homework, or strangers walking around my house looking for something. I got up with a heavy head and a feeling that I hadn't gotten enough sleep. After breakfast, I decided to go to the bank. I hadn't checked my account for a long time, and I wanted to withdraw some cash. I'd been paying more by card lately, but I always kept a small amount at home for unexpected expenses. Besides, he was going to buy a present for Dorothy. It was her birthday next week, and the antique store she liked to visit only accepted cash. The bank was in the center of town, a 25-minute drive. I rarely went downtown. Everything I needed was within walking distance from home. But I'd chosen this bank 20 years ago, when Martha and I had decided to open a joint account, and I didn't see any point in changing it. They knew me by sight, and the service was always top-notch. On the way, I thought about my upcoming meeting with Connor. I replayed our phone conversation last night, trying to figure out what was behind his words. My son's voice sounded strained, even agitated. What could be bothering him so much? Downtown was bustling with activity. Office workers rushing to lunch, tourists perusing storefronts, delivery men riding their bikes between cars. Houston has always been a city of contrasts. Modern skyscrapers adjoined with old neighborhoods, business centers bordered with cozy residential areas. It was not easy to find a parking lot. I had to park my car 2 blocks from the bank and walk. I wasn't in a hurry. I still had a few hours left before I met my son, and there was no need to rush anywhere. The bank was located on the first floor of a high-rise building that also housed the offices of several law firms. The room was spacious and bright, with marble floors and comfortable chairs in the waiting area. Behind the desk sat several tellers, most of whom I had known for years. "Welcome, Mr. Clark." Jessica, a young girl with a friendly smile, greeted me. "Haven't seen you in a while. How are you?" "I'm fine, thank you. I'd like to check my account balance and withdraw some cash." "Sure, no problem. Can I see some IDs, please?" I pulled out my driver's license and bank card. Jessica quickly entered the data into the computer, but suddenly frowned and counted something on the screen several times. "I'm sorry, Mr. Clark, but there's something strange here. Let me check with the senior manager." She went to a neighboring desk where a middle-aged woman in a strict suit was sitting. They talked quietly, glancing in my direction a few times. The manager approached me with a concerned look on her face. "Mr. Clark, my name is Patricia Wilson. I'm the senior manager of this department. Would you please come with me to my office? There's something we need to discuss." My heart sank. Did something happen to the account? Could it be that fraudsters had somehow gained access to my data? There had been a lot of newspaper stories about this kind of thing lately. The manager's office was small but cozy. There were pictures of the family on the desk and folders with documents on the shelves. Patricia offered me coffee, but I declined. "Mr. Clark," she began cautiously, "there was a large withdrawal from your account this morning. $35,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. How is that possible? I didn't authorize anyone to withdraw money from my account. The transaction was authorized. Your son, Connor Clark, presented a notarized document authorizing him to handle the funds in the account." My head is buzzing. Connor? A power of attorney? But I'd never signed any power of attorney. "Adormarianum. That's impossible," I said, trying to remain calm. "I never gave my son any power of attorney." Patricia looked at me carefully. "Mr. Clark, I understand your concern. Let me get this straight. Your son arrived around 11 o'clock this morning. He had with him a woman he identified as his wife. He presented a power of attorney, dated last week, stating that you authorize him to manage the account due to health issues." Health issues? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I don't have any health problems. Your son explained that you had recently been hospitalized with a heart attack and had asked him to take over your financial affairs while you recovered. I remained silent, trying to comprehend what I had heard. Connor had lied to the bank officials, filed a fake power of attorney, stole my money. But why? And how could he produce such a document? Can I see that power of attorney? I asked. Patricia opened the folder and pulled out several sheets. The document looked official enough, with stamps, signatures, all the necessary details. But the signature at the bottom of the page was definitely not mine. It's a forgery, I said firmly. It's not my signature. Mr. Clark, I know this is a shocking situation, but the document looks perfectly legitimate. It's notarized. It has all the necessary seals. That's when it hit me. Connor's a notary public. He has access to all the necessary seals and forms. He could produce any document that would look perfectly legal. Who authorized this power of attorney? Which notary? Patricia looked at the paperwork. Notary Connor Clark. Your son authorized it himself. Isn't that a conflict of interest? Can a notary public notarize documents where he himself is the beneficiary? The manager thought for a moment. To be honest, I'm not a lawyer, but formally the document looks properly executed. We have no right to doubt the authenticity of notarized papers unless there are obvious signs of forgery. And how did my son behave? What did he say? He seemed concerned about your condition. He said you asked him to help you with your finances while you were recovering. Said you needed the money for medical expenses and home care. I visualized this scene. Connor playing the role of the caring son. Wyvern by his side, nodding and confirming his words. Bank tellers who see the notary with official documents in front of them and have no reason to doubt. And what was his wife doing? Mrs. Clark was very upset. She told me how difficult your illness was, how worried you were about not being able to handle your finances on your own. She even wept when she told me how you'd asked her to give money to the doctors. Wyvern played her part as well as her husband. A distraught daughter-in-law worried about her sick father-in-law. What a touching picture. What was the money wrapped in? Your son asked for cash, explaining that some medical services are only paid for that way. We gave the money in wads of $5,000. Mrs. Clark packed it neatly into a large purse. I closed my eyes, imagining Wyvern greedily tucking wads of money into the bag. She was probably barely containing her joy, feigning sadness at my condition. Mr. Clark, Patricia said cautiously, if you claim that the power of attorney is forged, we can launch an internal affairs investigation. But that would require a police report and an examination of the documents. Yes, I said firmly. I want to file a report. This power of attorney is a forgery, and my son stole my money. The manager nodded. Good. We will block all transactions on the account and submit the documents for examination. I also recommend that you contact the police immediately. We filled out the necessary paperwork. Patricia explained that the bank would conduct an internal investigation and, if the forgery was confirmed, would reimburse the stolen amount. But the procedure could take several weeks. Leaving the bank, I felt devastated. $35,000 was my savings for a rainy day. Money I had been saving for years. But it wasn't just the amount. My own son had cheated me, forged documents, and stolen the money. I slowly made my way to the car, still not believing what was happening. My mind was swarming with thoughts. How long had Connor been planning this? Had he been thinking about his plan for months, or had he decided to steal spontaneously? And what was he going to do next? That's when I remembered the meeting. We're supposed to meet at a coffee shop in a few hours. Connor and Wyvern would be there, probably in high spirits, with my money in their purse. They'll pretend it's a normal family reunion, and what am I going to tell them? How will I act? Would I make it look like I knew they'd stolen it? The time before the meeting dragged agonizingly slow. I arrived home, but I couldn't find a place. I went from room to room, tried to read, turned on the television, but my thoughts kept returning to the morning's events at the bank. An hour before the appointed time, I went to a cafe. I arrived early and took a table in the corner, from where I could see the whole room and the entrance. Ordered coffee, which went cold while I waited for my son and daughter-in-law. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the door of the cafe opened and Connor and Wyvern walked in. They looked content and relaxed. Connor was dressed in an expensive suit, Wyvern in an elegant dress and carrying a new purse, which I saw for the first time. Apparently, my money had already started to be spent. I sat in the corner of the cafe, clutching a cooled cup of coffee, and watched my son and daughter-in-law head toward my table. Connor had the casual gait of a man who had just solved an important problem. Wyvern walked beside him, and I noticed her lightly cradling her new leather purse, obviously expensive, with gold-tone hardware. She hadn't had that purse as recently as this morning. "Hey, Dad!" Connor leaned over and hugged me like he'd done when I was a kid. His hug felt fake to me, like he was playing the part of a loving son. "How's it going? You look good." "Hello, Roger." Wyvern kissed my cheek. She smelled of expensive French perfume, which she had obviously bought recently. "We are so happy to see you." They sat down across from me and I scrutinized their faces. Connor looked relaxed, even happy. There wasn't a shadow of guilt or worry in his eyes. Wyvern was smiling that sweet smile she always turned on when talking to me. But today there was something special about it, a satisfaction bordering on triumph. "What do you want to order?" I asked, trying to make my voice sound natural. "A cappuccino for me," Wyvern said, fixing her hair. I noticed the new bracelet on her arm, thin, gold, obviously expensive, and perhaps that chocolate cake that they make so good here. "I'll have an espresso," Connor added. And yes, the cake was a good idea too. They acted as if it were a normal family gathering. No one was in a hurry to get to the business Connor had been talking about on the phone. Instead, they chatted happily about the weather, about the news, about the renovations Connor's neighbors were doing. "Can you imagine," his son said, stirring the sugar in his coffee. "They've been chiseling the wall for 3 weeks now. It's been going on from morning till night. Wyvern almost went crazy." "Terribly uncomfortable," said Wyvern. "Good thing we have a summer house. We can escape there for the weekend." "A summer house? I didn't know they had a summer house. When did they buy it? And with what money?" "Where is your summer house?" I asked. "In the suburbs near Lake Conroe," Connor answered. "It's a small house, but it's very cozy. Wyvern gardens there, and I fish." "Are you new to the place?" "Yes, just last week we closed the deal." Connor exchanged a quick glance with his wife. "The price was very attractive, so we couldn't pass up the opportunity. Last week. So they were already planning the theft? They were already looking for something to spend my money on?" I listened in silence to their stories of new purchases, which they presented as fortunes and bargains. Wyvern mentioned shopping at an expensive boutique where she'd found her dream dress at a discounted price, quite by accident. Connor talked about how he unexpectedly received an offer to buy a new watch at a special price. All of these purchases were made today, after visiting the bank. They spent my money without even waiting to see me, as if they had no doubt that their plan had succeeded. "How are you doing, Dad?" Connor finally asked, sipping his coffee. "Is your health okay?" The irony of the question was almost unbearable. A few hours ago, he'd been telling the bank tellers about my serious condition, and now he was asking about my health with the air of a concerned son. "I'm fine," I replied. I even went to the bank today to check on the account." Connor froze for a split second, but quickly pulled himself together. "To the bank? Why? Something wrong?" "I wanted to withdraw some money, and I hadn't checked my balance in a while." "And how are your finances?" Wyvern asked the question innocently, but I could see her shoulders tense. "It's interesting," I said slowly. "It turns out that $35,000 was withdrawn from my account this morning." Connor almost choked on his coffee. "What? How is that possible? Maybe it was a bank error." "No, it wasn't a mistake. The money was withdrawn by proxy. Someone forged my signature and took my savings." Wyvern turned pale, but Connor quickly took control of the situation. "Dad, this is terrible. We have to go to the police immediately. There are so many scammers out there these days. Have you filed a report yet?" My son's acting skills amazed me. He portrayed shock and outrage so convincingly that an outsider would never have suspected him of deception. "I did," I replied. "The bank is investigating." "You did the right thing. Do you have any idea who might have organized it? Maybe someone you know had access to your documents?" "I don't know. The bank said the power of attorney was notarized." "What notary?" Wyvern asked the question too quickly, showing her concern. "Connor Clark," I answered, looking directly at my son. There was silence. Connor turned white as chalk. Wyvern swallowed convulsively. What are you trying to say?" the son muttered. What I'm saying is that someone has used your seals and letterhead to produce a forged power of attorney. That's a serious offense, son. Someone has compromised your notary work. Connor licked his lips. His hands trembled slightly. Yes, it's very serious. I should check my office, see if someone broke in at night. Or one of the employees. God, this could ruin my career. Mom. What's particularly interesting, I continued, is that the man who withdrew the money gave your name and was with a woman he introduced as his wife. Wyvern dropped her spoon. The clinking of metal against porcelain sounded especially loud in the silence. Someone was impersonating me? Connor tried to feign surprise, but his voice shook. But how could they know my name? And about Wyvern? I don't know, son. But the bank has security footage. I think the police will find the culprits quickly. I said it calmly, but I watched their reactions carefully. Connor and Wyvern exchanged panicked glances. They hadn't thought about the cameras. Dad, Connor said, trying to pull himself together, I think we should go to the police right away. This case concerns me too. Someone used my name for fraud. Sorunum. Yes, Wyvern seconded. We'll help you sort it out. It's a family matter. Family business. Yeah, in a way, they were right. By the way, I said, pointing to Wyvern's purse. Nice bag. Is it new? Yeah, she said, and then caught herself. I mean, no, it's not exactly new. I just haven't worn it in a while. And the bracelet isn't new either? Wyvern instinctively covered her wrist with her hand. It was, a gift from Connor for our anniversary. And you, son, do you have a new watch? Connor twitched and hid his hand under the table. No, it's an old watch. I just had it repaired a while ago so it shines better. Lie after lie. They didn't even try to come up with plausible explanations. Nervous, confused, giving themselves away with every word. You know what? I said, getting up. I think we really should go to the police. Right now, while the trail is fresh. Yeah, sure, Connor agreed, but there was no enthusiasm in his voice. But let's stop by my office first, make sure the paperwork's in order. No, I said firmly, the police first, and let the office be checked by experts. They could no longer object without giving themselves away completely. We left the cafe, and I offered to drive my car. Connor started to protest, but I insisted. All the way to the police station, they were silent. Connor drummed his fingers nervously on his knee, and Wyvern frantically clutched her new purse. The same purse she'd put the stolen money in a few hours ago. I drove slowly, savoring their agony. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control of the situation. Yes, they had stolen my money. Yes, they had defrauded me and the bank. But now they were caught, and I knew it. And they were just beginning to realize what a trap they were in. Detective Martinez, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a patient expression, met us at the police station. I told him the details of the theft, showed him the documents from the bank, and explained that the power of attorney was a forgery. Connor and Wyvern sat next to me, occasionally confirming my words with nods and inserting comments about how awful it was and how willing they were to help with the investigation. The detective listened intently, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. Mr. Clark Jr., he turned to Connor, you said that someone could have used your notary seals? Yes, that's the only explanation that comes to mind, his son replied. Although I don't see how someone could have gotten into my office. Who else has access to your seals and forms? Only my assistant, Cindy, but she's been with me for 5 years and I trust her completely. Nevertheless, we're going to need to talk to her. And we'll need to get all the documents and seals for forensics. Connor's face stretched. But what about my job? I have appointments with clients. I'm afraid that's unavoidable, sir. While the investigation is ongoing, your notary work will be suspended. I've seen my son fight the urge to object. Being disbarred meant financial ruin for him, but I couldn't object. It would look suspicious. The detective scheduled a meeting for the next day, when the first results of the examination would be ready. We left the station in complete silence. Look, Dad, Connor finally said when we reached the car. Why don't you come to our place? Wyvern will make dinner, and we can talk about it in peace. Thanks, but I'm going home. I'm tired of all this. Then we'll walk you home? Wyvern suggested it. No need. You two have enough to do without me. Indeed, they had to urgently decide what to do with the stolen money and the things they had bought with it. How to explain to the police the new summer house, the expensive purchases, the sudden improvement in their financial situation. I got into the car and drove home. In the rearview mirror, I saw Connor and Wyvern standing on the sidewalk, arguing heatedly about something, probably discussing what to do next. And I felt something resembling satisfaction for the first time in years. Yes, they stole my money, but now they're caught and they'll have to answer for their actions. Not just to me, but to the law. I was pulling into my front yard when I noticed a familiar car at the gate. Connor's dark blue SUV was parked right out front, as if the owners were in a hurry to get in, so they'd arrived before me. I wondered how long they'd been waiting and what they were thinking. Parking the car in the garage, I took my time getting out. Through the window, I could see the light on in the living room. They were already in the house. The spare key was always under the flower pot by the back door. Connor had known that since he was a kid. Martha had insisted that her son have access to the house in case of an emergency. I never thought that key would be used for any other purpose. I walked slowly to the front door, wondering how I would behave next. At the police station, they could still pretend to be innocent victims of circumstance, but now, alone with me, the mask had to come off. I wondered if they would try to continue the comedy or admit their guilt. As I entered the house, I heard muffled voices from the kitchen. They were talking quietly but emotionally. Connor was explaining something in an agitated whisper, and Wyvern interrupted him periodically with sharp phrases. It was impossible to make out the words, but the intonation spoke for themselves. They were arguing, blaming each other, looking for a way out of the situation. I hung my jacket in the hallway and coughed loudly, letting them know I was there. The voices in the kitchen quieted instantly. Connor appeared a few seconds later, with a strained smile on his face. "Oh, Dad, you're home already. We were a little worried, so we thought we'd come by and wait for you. We hope you don't mind." "Of course I don't mind. It's your house, too." The phrase sounded ambiguous, and I saw my son's smile tremble. Wyvern came out of the kitchen, holding my favorite cup, the one I drank coffee out of in the morning. She was drinking something out of it, and it struck me as particularly cheeky. "Such random. Roger, we made tea," she said, setting the cup on the coffee table. "We wanted to talk to you about this terrible situation with the bank." "Yes, Dad," Connor said. "We've been talking all day about what we could do. Maybe we should hire a private investigator, or go to another bank for advice." They were starting the play again, caring relatives, ready to help a bereaved old man. I silently made my way to the living room and sat down in my chair. Connor and Wyvern sat on the couch across from me, still trying to act sympathetic. "You know," I said quietly, looking at their faces, "after our visit to the police, I've had some time to think, and I remembered some interesting details." "What kind of details?" Wyvern leaned forward a little, a wary tone in her voice. Like the way the bank teller described the people who withdrew the money. A middle-aged man, tall, dark-haired, wearing an expensive suit. A woman of about 35, blonde, elegantly dressed. "Very much like you, don't you think?" Connor laughed nervously. "Dad, you realize there are thousands of people like that in Houston, right? That's a very general description." "Maybe. And the bank manager also told me how this woman was putting money neatly into a purse, a big leather purse with gold hardware." I looked at Wyvern. "By the way, where is that purse you were in the cafe with today?" Wyvern glanced toward the hallway where she had left the purse. It's at the entrance." "Can I see it?" "Why?" Her voice became higher than usual. "Just curious. I want to compare it to the witness's description." Connor got up from the couch. "Dad, what are you trying to say? Do you really suspect us of stealing your money?" I looked at my son for a long time, studying his face. The boy I taught to ride his bike and helped with his homework had disappeared. In front of me stood a stranger capable of deceiving his own father and stealing his savings. "Is there any reason to be suspicious?" "Of course not." Wyvern was indignant. "We are your family. How can you say that?" "Family," I repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, we were family once. When Martha was alive, when you came every weekend, when we had dinner together and made plans for the future. And now?" "What do you mean?" Now you come every few months. Now you discuss whether it's time for me to go into a nursing home. Now you're appraising my dishes and antiques. Now you buy summer houses and expensive things with money of unknown origin. There was silence. Connor and Wyvern looked at me with ill-concealed fear. Did you think I wouldn't find out? I said quietly but clearly. I have news for you too. What are you talking about? Connor muttered. I'm talking about knowing who stole my money from the bank. Wyvern turned so pale that the dark circles under her eyes showed under a layer of makeup. Charm. Roger, you're confused. No, Wyvern, I'm not. At 11 o'clock and 15 minutes this morning, you and my son walked into the bank with a fake power of attorney. Connor introduced himself to the bank tellers as the caring son of a sick father. You played the role of the worried daughter-in-law. You withdrew $35,000 in cash and packed it in your new purse. Connor sank slowly onto the couch as if his legs had stopped holding him up. Dad, after the bank, you went shopping. Wyvern bought a dress, a purse, a bracelet, and perfume. Connor bought a watch. Then you went to the realtor and put a down payment on a cottage near Lake Conroe. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon when we met at the cafe, you had spent at least half of the stolen money. Wyvern covered her face with her hands. We can explain everything. Explain. I'm very interested in hearing it. Connor took a deep breath and looked into my eyes. Okay, Dad. Yes, it was us. But we had no choice. No choice to steal $35,000 from your own father? We're in debt. Wyvern burst into flames. You have no idea how hard our lives are. Tell me, what kind of debts do you have? Connor rubbed his temples nervously. The office brings in less income than it used to. Competition has increased. Clients are saving money on notary services, and expenses are only increasing. Office rent, assistant salary, taxes, and that gives you the right to rob me? We didn't rob you. Wyvern was indignant. We just took what we would have inherited someday anyway. There it was, the main confession. They thought my money was theirs simply because I was their father. Oh, that's it. So you decided not to wait for me to die? Don't say that, Connor muttered. We didn't mean you any harm. It's just, there wasn't time to wait. There was no time to wait, I repeated. What did you have to spend $35,000 on in such a hurry? They looked at each other. We have a business plan, Wyvern began, an opportunity to open our own restaurant. But the investor requires an immediate decision, or the offer is withdrawn. A restaurant? What about the cottage by the lake? What about all those new things you bought? The summer house. The cottage is an investment, Connor tried to explain. Real estate prices are going up there. And the stuff, well, we have to look respectable if we want to open a restaurant. Lie after lie after lie. Even now that they were caught red-handed, they kept making excuses. And for the sake of this restaurant, you decided to forge a power of attorney? It was a compulsory measure, Connor said. We knew you would have helped us if you'd realized the gravity of the situation. But you're so cautious. You'd ask questions, demand a business plan, analyze the risks, and we didn't have time for all those formalities. Formalities? You call honesty and trust formalities? Dad, we'll pay you back, Connor said hurriedly. As soon as the restaurant is profitable, we'll pay you back every penny. With interest. What if the restaurant goes under? If your business plan fails? They didn't answer. Obviously, that wasn't part of their plan. You know what strikes me the most? I said, getting up from my chair. It's not that you stole the money. It's not that you forged documents. It's how easily you lied to my face. At the cafe, at the police station, acting shocked, offering help, swearing loyalty. You're wonderful actors. Roger, we didn't mean to deceive you, Wyvern began, but I held up my hand to stop her. That's enough. I've heard everything. I walked to the phone and picked it up. What are you doing? Connor asked, startled. I'm calling Detective Martinez. I think he'll be interested to know that the criminals came forward. Dad, wait! Connor jumped up from the couch. Let's just leave the police out of this. This is a family matter. We can handle it ourselves. A family matter? I hung up the phone slowly. Okay. Let's settle it as a family. Where's the money? What money? The $20,000 you have left after shopping. Wyvern clutched her purse frantically to her chest. It's, we need it for the restaurant. So you're not going to return the stolen goods? We'll return everything, but later, Connor insisted. Give us time, Dad. We're family. Family, I repeated and shook my head. Family doesn't steal from each other. A family doesn't forge documents. A family doesn't lie in front of their own people. I picked up the phone again. Okay, Wyvern said sharply. Okay, we'll give the money back. But only what's left. You can't get back what you spent. Why not? The cottage can be sold, the stuff too. We can't, Connor muttered. The cottage is in another person's name. And the stuff, well, who buys used jewelry? I see. So you stole $35,000 and you're willing to pay back half of it at most? It's better than nothing, Wyvern said defiantly. I stared at them for a long time. My son and his wife, people I considered family. They'd stolen my money, lied to my face, and now they were haggling over how much they were willing to give me back. You know, I said calmly, I'm kind of glad it happened the way it did. Glad? Wyvern was surprised. Yes, because now I know exactly who you are and what you think of me. The money is a small thing. The main thing is that I won't have any more illusions about our family. Connor tried to say something, but I didn't let him finish. Nuskout, now get out of my house and leave the key. There was a heavy silence in the living room after I said that. Connor stood in the middle of the room looking lost, as if he couldn't believe he was being kicked out of his parents' house. Wyvern clutched her purse so tightly that her knuckles turned white. They both realized the game was over, but they still hoped to find a way out. Dad, Connor finally said, his voice pleading, you can't be serious about the police. Think about what it would mean for me, for my career. I turned slowly back to my son. Did you think about that when you were fabricating the fake power of attorney? Yeah, I didn't think it would turn out this way. It was a spontaneous decision. Spontaneous? I couldn't hide the sarcasm in my voice. Connor, you've been a notary for 8 years. You know exactly what forgery is and what the penalties are. The son lowered his head. Yes, I do, but we were desperate. Debts, creditors, threats of bankruptcy. I didn't see any other way out. So you thought stealing from your own father was the answer? Not stealing, Wyvern shrieked. We were going to give it back. When? A year from now? In 10 years? Or after I died? When it wouldn't matter anymore? Wyvern turned away, unable to find an answer. I continued, because I wanted them to realize the depth of their betrayal. Do you know what struck me most about this story? About this story? Not the theft itself, but how meticulously you planned it. Connor, you used your position as a notary, your seals, your office. You forged my signature, made a false document, made up a cover story about my illness. Dad, let me finish. You didn't come to the bank as a thief, but as a caring son, playing the part, pretending to care about my health. And Wyvern, she too played the distraught daughter-in-law, ready to help her ailing father-in-law. I paced the room, collecting my thoughts. You fooled not only me, but the bank employees as well. People believed you because they saw a notary with official documents in front of them. They showed humanity, sympathy for a family tragedy, and you used their kindness to commit a crime. We didn't mean to deceive anyone, Wyvern muttered. It was just the circumstances. Circumstances? I stopped and looked at her. What circumstances led you to forge documents? Financial problems, Connor answered. I have serious business debts. The bank is threatening to call off the loans. The landlord is demanding overdue office fees. How much do you owe? About $50,000. 50? But you only stole 35. We were expecting to take more, the son admitted, but the bank said they needed advance notice to withdraw large amounts of money, so they were planning to steal more. Maybe all my savings. How did you get into so much debt? Your office has always had a steady income. Connor and Wyvern exchanged glances. Tell him, the wife said. It's all out in the open anyway. A year ago, I decided to expand the business. Connor began reluctantly. I took out a loan to buy a new office, hired additional employees, launched an advertising campaign. I thought the demand for notary services would grow. And what happened? The market turned out to be oversaturated. Many young notaries appeared who work for less money. Clients began to leave to competitors. But the extra costs remained, Viverin added. The loan has to be paid, employees have to pay salaries, rent has to be paid. I was beginning to get the picture. Failed investments, mounting debts, creditor pressure. But that didn't justify stealing. So instead of cutting costs, laying off redundant staff, or selling the office, you decided to steal money from me? We thought it was a temporary measure, Connor justified himself. We planned to borrow the money, invest it in advertising, attract new clients, and pay you back with interest. What if the plan hadn't worked? It would have worked, Wyvern said stubbornly. We have connections, experience, reputation. Reputation? I laughed bitterly. Connor, do you realize that your reputation is now ruined forever? When this story gets out, who's going to trust you to notarize the documents? My son's face turned pale. Maybe we can cover up the scandal. How? The bank is already investigating. The police are aware of it. Tomorrow we'll have a forensic examination of the documents to prove they're forgeries. Dad, Connor knelt down in front of me. I'm begging you, take a statement from the police. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I'll pay you back the money, every penny of it. I'll sell the car, the office, anything. It would have been a touching scene if there had been genuine remorse and a desire to make amends. But all I saw in my son's eyes was fear for his own skin. What about the power of attorney? How will you explain to the bank where that document came from? I'll say that I mixed up the documents, or that you did sign the power of attorney, but you forgot about it. So you want me to admit I'm an old man with a bad memory? It's better than a fraud charge. I stepped away from my son, who was still kneeling. Connor, stand up. This is humiliating, and for both of us. He rose slowly, staring at me pleadingly. Do you realize, I said calmly, that there's more to this than just stealing money? You didn't just steal $35,000 from me. You broke a trust that had been built over decades. We can rebuild the relationship, Wyvern interjected. It's family. In a family, everything is forgiven. Forgiven? I looked at her carefully. What exactly do you have to forgive? Stealing, lying, forging documents? Or that you think I'm stupid enough to steal from me with impunity? We don't think you're stupid, Connor tried to justify himself. No. Then what do you think? Connor, you're a notary. You know that a power of attorney is a serious legal document. You know the consequences of forging it, but you still decided to commit this crime. Why? The son was silent. To me, because he thought his old father would never find out about the theft? Or because he thought I didn't have the guts to sue my own son? Dad, you're my dad. You can't ruin my life. I'm not the one who's ruining your life. You did it when you decided to forge a power of attorney. I went to the window and looked outside. The evening was quiet and peaceful. Neighbors were watering their lawns. Children were playing in their yards. Life was going on. And here in my living room, a family was falling apart. You know what strikes me most about this story? I said without turning around. The technicality of your crime. What do you mean? You made a fake power of attorney in your own office, using your own stamps and letterhead. You authorized the forgery yourself. That's professional stupidity, Connor. I didn't think you'd check. Of course you didn't. You were counting on me sitting at home and not even knowing it was stolen. Maybe you were hoping I'd die before I found out the money was missing. Dad, how can you say that? How else do you explain your confidence in impunity? I turned around and saw Wyvern crying. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, smearing her makeup. Roger, she sobbed, we're really sorry. We'll never do anything like that again. You won't? What's to stop you from doing it again? Conscience? You didn't have one before. We wouldn't be able to, Connor said. I'd lose my notary license. No one would hire me for a serious job with a reputation like that. And you blame me for that? No, my son stammered. I realize it's my own fault, but can't you give me another chance? A chance to do what? To steal from me again when you're in financial trouble? We'll never… Connor, stop it! I raised my hand. You already said that an hour ago when you said you wanted to help me find criminals. I can't take your word for it anymore. The son lowered his head. Wyvern continued to cry, but her tears looked more like tears of anger and despair than genuine remorse. Listen, I said, sitting back in the chair, I'll explain to you what's going to happen next. Tomorrow the forensics will confirm that the power of attorney is forged. The police will open a criminal case for fraud and forgery. The prosecutor's office will charge you. And if I return the money, that might lessen the sentence, but it won't eliminate it. You committed a crime, Connor. You committed more than one. Forgery, fraud, abuse of office. How many years do you get for those offenses? 3 to 7 years, plus disbarment as a notary public, plus restitution. Connor put his hands over his face. My life was over. No, I said firmly. Your old life is over. A life where you could cheat and steal with impunity. But you have a chance to start a new life. An honest life. What kind of honest life? Who would hire an ex-convict? You will. There's plenty of work, but it pays less than a notary. Wyvern lifted her weeping face. What will happen to me? I didn't sign any documents. You were an accomplice. You helped your husband defraud bank officials, package the stolen money, spend it on purchases. That's a felony too. But I didn't know it was illegal. I thought Connor had actually gotten permission from you. I looked at her with regret. Wyvern, you don't have to lie. You knew exactly what was going on. Otherwise, why all this game of sick father-in-law? She cried again, louder this time. You know, I said, rising from my chair, I feel sorry for you. Sorry not because you'll be punished, but because you chose this path. You had other options. What options? Connor asked. You could have come to me and been honest about your problems. Ask for help, for advice, for a loan. I'm your father, Connor. I would have helped you. You would have said no, said it was too risky. Maybe, but it would have been an honest refusal of an honest request, not theft by deception. The son was silent, realizing the rightness of my words. Now, I said, heading for the phone, I'll call Detective Martinez and tell him about our conversation. Dad, wait! Connor rushed over to me. At least give me time to pack my things, warn my clients. Are you thinking of running away? No, of course not. I want to close the cases with dignity, not leave the clients in the lurch. I hesitated. On the one hand, Connor could be trying to escape. On the other hand, he might actually have unfinished business that would suffer from a sudden arrest. Okay, I said finally. You have until tomorrow morning. But remember, I've told the police everything. If you try to escape, they'll find you very quickly. Thanks, Dad. I won't betray your trust. You've already lost my trust forever, I said coldly. But I don't want innocent people to get hurt because of your problems. Connor nodded and headed for the exit. Wyvern followed him, still sobbing. At the door, his son turned around. Dad, I want you to know, I'm really sorry about what happened. I know, I replied. Sorry for getting caught. The door closed and I was alone in the silence of my house. For the first time in years, I felt truly alone, not physically, but mentally. The family that I thought would be my support in my old age had turned out to be a mirage. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. It was a disturbing dream. All night long, I dreamed fragments of last night's events mixed with memories of Connor's childhood. I'd taught him how to ride a bike, or he'd forged my signature on a diary for a bad grade. Even then, as a kid, he preferred deception to honestly admitting his mistakes. I brewed coffee and sat by the window, watching the waking neighborhood. Neighbors were coming out of their houses, getting into their cars, rushing to work. The ordinary lives of ordinary people who were unaware of the dramas playing out behind the closed doors of their neighbors' homes. At 8 in the morning, the phone rang. Connor's number popped up on the screen. Hello, I answered discreetly. Dad, it's me. My son's voice sounded hoarse, like he'd been up all night. Can I come over? We need to talk. We talked about everything yesterday. Dad, please. I realized something. I just want to be honest with you. Honestly, after all these years of lying, he's finally ready to tell the truth? Okay, I said. Come, but no Wyvern. She's really worried. She was up all night crying. I'm sorry to hear that, but this is between the two of us. I'm on it. I'll be there in half an hour. Connor arrived right on time. He looked terrible. Wrinkled clothes, unshaven face, red eyes. It was like he'd aged a few years overnight. Come in, I said, not offering him a hug like I'd done before. We walked into the living room. Connor sat on the edge of the couch, crumpling some papers nervously in his hands. "What have you got there?" I asked, pointing to the papers. "Bank statements about my debts. I want to show you that I wasn't lying about my financial problems." He handed me a few sheets of paper. Indeed, the picture was sad. Overdue loans, rent arrears, debts to suppliers. The total amount exceeded $70,000. "See, Dad? I didn't make up those debts. I was really desperate. And that justifies stealing?" "No, of course not. But I want you to understand it wasn't greed or a desire for easy money. It was panic." I scrutinized the paperwork. The debts were real, but they weren't incurred yesterday. "Connor, these are dates. Some of the loans are 6 months past due. Why didn't you come to me then?" My son lowered his head. "I was embarrassed. I'm a successful notary. I'm supposed to have everything under control. How could I admit to my father that my business was failing?" So pride was more important than honesty? Yes, and I realize now how stupid that was. If I had come to you then, things would have been different. Maybe, or maybe you would have just spent my money and racked up more debt. Connor lifted his head. "Why do you think that?" "Because I know you, son. Ever since you were a kid, you've been used to solving problems by work, not by work. A bad grade, forge a signature in your diary. Broken window, blame it on the neighbor boy. And now business debts, stealing from my dad. I've changed, Dad. This situation taught me a lot." "In one night?" "I doubt it." Connor rubbed his face nervously with his hands. "What can I do to make you believe me?" "Nothing. The time for trust is over." "But I'm your son." "Yes, my son, who stole my money and lied to my face. You can't change that, Connor." The son got up and started pacing the room. "Dad, I'm going to pay you back all the money. I'll sell the car, the office, everything I own. And the cottage, and the new wyverns. The summer house, too. Although, there are complications." "What kind of complications?" Connor's confused. "The cottage was registered to a front man. They thought it was safer." "Safer from what?" "From, possible questions about the money's origins. So they knew they were committing a crime from the start. No spontaneity, no desperation, just cold calculation." "Who's the front man?" "A friend of Wyvern's. He agreed for a small fee." "And now he owns the cottage?" "Technically, yes, but we have a verbal agreement." "A verbal agreement with a man who's already agreed to participate in a fraud?" "Connor, you're as naive as a child." My son stopped and looked at me. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that your friend has already become the owner of the cottage bought with my money, and he's not going to give it back." Connor's face stretched. "But we had a deal. We agreed to help him deceive the authorities, to hide the real origin of the money. And now you're surprised he fooled you?" "No, he's not that kind of man. We've known each other for years. Years ago, you also knew me as a father who loves you. Did that stop you from stealing my money?" Connor slowly sank back down onto the couch. "So we're not going to get the cottage back?" "Probably not." "What about the other purchases?" "Wyvern. She tried to return some of the stuff to the stores yesterday, but they said it's a 24-hour return policy, and not all of them." "How much did she get back?" "About $3,000. Of the $35,000 they stole, they were only willing to return $3,000. The rest was spent or lost in 24 hours. "What about the money that was still left in cash?" Connor didn't answer. "Connor," I said, "where's the rest of the money?" We spent it." "On what?" "Wyvern went to see a lawyer last night. She wanted to know what we're up against and how to defend ourselves." "How much did the consultation cost?" $15,000. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. $15,000 for one consultation? Not for a consultation. It was for representing us in court. The lawyer said the case was complicated, time-consuming, labor-intensive. "And you paid him with my stolen money?" "Dad, we have to defend ourselves. If we go to jail, you don't get the money." Thief logic. Steal the money from the victim, then spend it on a defense of the theft. "What's this lawyer's name?" "Stephen Brooks. He specializes in financial crimes." I knew this Brooks guy by reputation. An expensive lawyer who really knew how to get his clients out of the most difficult situations. But $15,000 for one case was a bit much for him. Connor, you've been scammed. Brooks doesn't usually charge more than $5,000 for cases like this. What? But he said what he had to say to get the money. You went to him with a wad of cash, told him about the theft. He realized he was dealing with desperate people willing to pay any kind of money. Connor's head was spinning. So he'd scammed us too? Of course he did. Criminals are easy prey for crooks. They can't complain to the police. They can't demand justice. But what do we do now? You? Nothing. You made your choice when you decided to steal my money. That's when the phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was Detective Martinez. Excuse me, I need to take this, I said to Connor and picked up the phone. Mr. Clark? Detective Martinez, I have an update on your case. Go ahead. Forensics confirmed the signature on the power of attorney was forged. We also got the security footage from the bank. The perpetrators have been identified. I see. We're ready to make arrests. When would be a good time for you to testify further? I looked at Connor, who turned pale as he realized what we were talking about. Detective, wait a minute. I covered the phone with my hand and turned to my son. Last chance, Connor. Anything you want to say before you're arrested? My son was silent, just staring at me in horror. Detective, I'm ready to come to you right now. That's great. What about the suspects? We can have them in custody today. I looked at Connor again. One of them is at my house. You can take it. We'll be there in half an hour. I hung up the phone. Connor sat still, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. It's over, he whispered. No, I said. It's the beginning of taking responsibility for your actions. Dad, can I ask you a favor? What's that? Call Wyvern. Warn her that they're coming for her too. At least let her be prepared. I hesitated. On the one hand, it made sense to let them surrender voluntarily. On the other hand, they might try to escape. All right, I said at last. But you stay here and wait for the police. Of course, I'm not going anywhere. I dialed Wyvern's number. She answered after the first beep, as if she'd been expecting a call. Roger, what's wrong? Wyvern, forensics confirmed the fake ID. The police are coming for arrests. You have half an hour to get ready. There was silence on the other end of the line. Wyvern, can you hear me? Yeah. Yes, I can. Roger, is there no way? No, I said firmly. The time for negotiation is over. What about Connor? Connor's already here. We're waiting for the police together. I see, thanks for the heads up. She hung up without saying goodbye. How did she take the news? Connor asked. Calmer than I expected. She's a strong woman. She'll get through this. How about you? Connor shrugged. I don't know. I guess it's time to accept the consequences of my decisions. We sat in silence, waiting for the police to arrive. Connor drummed his fingers nervously on his knee, and I thought about how quickly a life built on lies can fall apart. 25 minutes later, 2 cars, a police car and a civilian car, pulled up in front of the house. 4 uniformed men and Detective Martinez in a gray suit got out. Well, son, I said, rising from my chair, it's time to go. Connor stood up too, but his legs were shaking. Dad, I'm sorry. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but still. I forgive you, Connor, but that doesn't change the consequences. I know, and I'm willing to accept them. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. I went to open the door, and Connor stood in the middle of the living room, awaiting his fate. Welcome, Detective Martinez, I said as I let the officers in. The suspect is waiting for you in the living room. Detective Martinez strode into the living room with the professional calm of a man who had seen many such scenes. He was followed by 2 uniformed police officers, a young patrolman with a serious face, and an experienced female sergeant with tired but attentive eyes. Connor stood in the center of the room with his hands behind his back, as if he were already preparing to be handcuffed. Connor Clark? The detective addressed him. Yes, that's me. You're under arrest on suspicion of fraud, forgery, and abuse of authority. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. I listened to the words familiar from the movies. but now they sounded completely different. This wasn't a movie. This was reality. My son is a criminal being arrested in my home. Connor listened to all the rights in silence, only nodding at the end. Do you understand your rights? Martinez asked. Yes, I do. Do you have anything to add to your testimony from yesterday? Connor looked at me, then at the detective. I'd like to enter a full plea of guilty. I was the one who made the fake power of attorney and withdrew the money from my father's account. Wyvern. My wife only helped me, but I initiated it. Mr. Clark, the female sergeant said, it's better to discuss this with a lawyer. You're making statements now that could hurt your defense. I have no defense, Connor replied. I committed a crime, and I'm willing to be punished. The sergeant shrugged and pulled out the handcuffs. Hold out your hands, please. The metal clicked. My son became the arresting officer. I watched the procedure with a strange feeling, both pity for Connor and satisfaction at the triumph of justice. Mr. Clark Sr., the detective turned to me, we need you to come with us to the station for additional statements. We'll also need you to file the restitution papers. Sure, let me just get the paperwork. I've collected bank statements, copies of statements, and other papers related to the case. Connor stood next to the cops without looking up. Before he left, he turned to me. Dad, take care of yourself. Thanks for giving me a chance to turn myself in willingly. Take care of yourself, son. Those were our last words before the long separation. I realized that the next time we would meet would be soon, and under very different circumstances. Connor was taken away in one car. I went with the detective in a second. On the way, Martinez told me the results of the investigation. The forensic analysis of the signature leaves no doubt that the document is forged. Your son used his own notary seals, but signed your name himself. Quite ineptly, by the way. Any expert would have noticed that immediately. What about Wyvern? We sent a patrol to her apartment, but it was empty. Neighbors said they saw her with her suitcases this morning, so she's making a run for it after all. I wonder how far she's planning on traveling with the money she has left. Will you find her? I will. She's got bank surveillance tapes, witness statements. She won't get far. At the police station, I detailed the circumstances of the case. I told them about my son's financial problems, about last night's conversation, about the confessions they'd made. The detective took careful notes on every detail. Mr. Clark, he said at the end, your testimony will be very helpful to the investigation. But I must warn you, the trial could drag on for months. What about my money? The bank has already agreed to reimburse the stolen money, plus compensation for moral damages, another $10,000. So I get $45,000 instead of the $35,000 I stole? Exactly. The bank admitted they didn't check the paperwork thoroughly enough. That's their responsibility. I signed the necessary papers and returned home that evening. The house seemed especially quiet and empty. I walked through the rooms thinking about what had happened. The next day, the bank representative called. Mr. Johnson, the senior manager, apologized for what had happened and assured me that it wouldn't happen again. Mr. Clark, we are completely overhauling our power of attorney review procedures. Your case has taught us a serious lesson. I hope so. The reimbursement will be deposited into your account within 3 business days, and the bank is also prepared to offer you special terms of service as an injured party. A week later, the money did arrive in the account. $45,000 more than was stolen. But this sum did not bring joy. Every dollar was a reminder of her son's betrayal. At the same time, news came about Wyvern. She was detained at the Dallas airport while trying to fly to Mexico. She was found in possession of a fake passport and about $3,000 in cash, all that was left of the stolen money. Detective Martinez called to give us the details. Your sister-in-law tried to hide under a false identity, but the documents turned out to be as bad a forgery as the power of attorney. Apparently, you went to a cheap scam artist. What about the summer house and the shopping? The cottage is actually registered to an outsider, one Ricardo Sanchez. He claims that he bought it with his own money, and he has documents confirming the origin of the funds. So they lost that money for good? Looks like it. Sanchez is an experienced con man who specializes in these schemes. He helps criminals launder the money, then takes the assets for himself. Justice was served where I didn't expect it. Connor and Wyvern not only lost my money, but also became victims of other fraudsters. A month later, there was a preliminary hearing. I was present in the courtroom as a victim. Connor sat at the defendant's table in his prison uniform, visibly thin and gaunt. The Wyverns were seated separately. They were being tried separately. The judge read the charges. Connor was charged with grand fraud, forgery of documents, and abuse of authority. Wyvern was charged with accessory to fraud and attempting to evade investigation. When the judge asked if they would plead guilty, Connor stood up and said clearly, "Guilty on all charges." Wyvern tried to deny involvement, but the evidence was too compelling. Surveillance footage, bank officials' statements, my testimony, everything spoke against her. 2 months later, the main trial took place. The prosecutor demanded 5 years in prison for Connor, plus a 10-year disbarment as a notary public. For Wyvern, 3 years probation with mandatory community service. Connor's lawyer, not that crook Brooks, but a state-appointed defense attorney, asked for leniency, citing the defendant's heartfelt confession and remorse. I was called as a witness. I told the court everything I knew about the motives for the crime, how the theft took place, and the behavior of my son and daughter-in-law after the exposure. "Tell me, Mr. Clark," asked the prosecutor, "will you forgive your son?" I was silent for a long time, pondering the answer. As a father, yes, I do. But as a citizen, I think he should be punished for his crimes. Connor listened to my testimony with a stone face. When I finished, he asked to speak. "Tonight, Your Honor, I want to apologize again to my father. I made an unforgivable mistake, and I am willing to take full responsibility. The only thing I ask is that you don't punish my wife severely. She acted under my influence." Even now, in the direst of situations, Connor tried to protect Wyvern. Maybe there was still some humanity left in him after all. The court retired to deliberate. An hour later, the judge announced the sentence. Connor received 4 years in a general security colony, plus a ban on notary activity for 15 years. Wyvern was sentenced to 2 years probation with an obligation to pay part of the damages. After the verdict was announced, a guard came up to me. "Mr. Clark, your son wants to say goodbye." I approached Connor. He was handcuffed, but he was upright. "Dad, thanks for coming. You're my son. I couldn't not come. I'll be writing to you from juvie, if you want to write back. We'll see. I'll change, Dad. When I get out, I'll be a different person." "I hope so." We hugged one last time before he went to juvie. I felt his shoulders shake. My son was crying, but I couldn't see the tears. Wyvern tried to approach me after the verdict, but I walked past without turning around. We had nothing to discuss with her. In the evening, I returned home and sat in my chair by the window. Justice had been done. The criminals had been punished. I had been compensated with interest, but I felt no joy. Outside the window, neighbor Dorothy was watering her roses. Frank was walking Charlie. Life went on as if nothing had happened, and I no longer had a family. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of the real estate agent. It was time to make a decision about the future. "Hello, is this Houston Homes? I'd like to discuss the sale of a house." The house was too big for one person. It held too many memories, good and bad. It was time to start a new life in a new place where no one knew about my family tragedy. The money from the sale of the house plus the bank compensation allowed me to buy a small apartment in a good neighborhood and live the rest of my days comfortably. Without relatives waiting for me to die for an inheritance, no false care and fake smiles, Connor got what he deserved. So did the Wyvern. And I got freedom from illusions of marital happiness. At 72, that too was a gift of sorts. The bridges were finally burned, and I had no regrets.